Hi, everyone. I'm Dan Wolken, National College Football Reporter for USA Today Sports, and welcome to the Amway Coaches Poll reveal event here at the New York Institute of Technology, where in a few minutes, for the first time in its history, the final coaches poll will be announced live and streamed on usatoday.com. I'd like to thank Amway for its sponsorship of the poll and the coaches from the American Football Coaches Association for their diligent work each week in selecting the nation's top 25 teams. In just a few minutes, we will have another first, with a committee selecting the 4 teams for the college football playoff. For the next 45 minutes or so, we will discuss the 2014 season and the teams that have made a case to be included in the playoff with our esteemed panel of coaches. It's been quite a season in college football. Florida State began the year in the #1 spot, coming off of its national championship last year. And I think you look back to how we got here to December 7th, I think you have to start there. Because even though Florida State didn't always look like the best team in the country, they were always the biggest story, whether on the field or off the field. Who can forget the finish of the Notre Dame game, the comebacks against Clemson, Louisville, and Miami, all terrific. Then there was the strength of the SEC, and particularly the SEC West. Mississippi State seemingly coming out of nowhere, getting to #1 after a big victory against Auburn. After that, Ole Miss looked like the hot team, beating Alabama, with Katy Perry providing perhaps the most unique ESPN game day picker in history. The finish of the Auburn-Ole Miss game will be remembered for decades. Alabama and LSU played another classic, and the Egg Bowl was perhaps the biggest game ever in the state of Mississippi. Another big storyline, the Big Ten struggled all season for respect, especially after week 2 when Michigan State lost to Oregon, Michigan was blown out at Notre Dame, and Ohio State lost at home to Virginia Tech, all within a couple hours of each other. The Big 12 came down to a battle of private schools. Baylor, coming back from 21 points down in the fourth quarter to beat TCU on October 11th, became one of the benchmark results of the season and a key point of controversy in the college football playoff rankings. Then out west, one of the most competitive Pac-12 races in years ended with Oregon and Arizona, one team everybody expected to be there and one team nobody expected to be there playing for the title. It's been a truly excellent, competitive, exciting regular season. And now that all the games have been played, it's time to release the final Amway Coaches Poll. All right, #1, not surprising, is Alabama. #2, Florida State, undefeated, winner of the ACC title. Oregon, #3, coming off their victory over Arizona. And look at #4, Ohio State, off of that 59-0 victory over Wisconsin, leaving Baylor at #5 and TCU, despite a big win yesterday against Iowa State, falling down to #6. This is obviously going to be the big point of controversy in the playoff rankings. The coaches have weighed in. They have Ohio State at #4. And we're going to talk about that here with our esteemed panel of coaches. I'd like to now introduce our 3 special guests who voted in the Amway Coaches Poll this year to talk about these teams and this historic day in college football. First, he's won Coach of the Year in both the SEC and ACC, and he was the Bobby Dodd National Coach of the Year award winner last season. He's won a national championship as an offensive coordinator, counts both Eli and Peyton Manning among his pupils, and is among the most respected voices in the sport. This season, he guided Duke to a 9-3 record and will lead the Blue Devils into a 3rd consecutive bowl game, something that has never happened in that school's history. Let's give a big round of applause to welcome Coach David Cutcliffe.
Thank you, Dan. Good afternoon.
Our second guest has the distinction of being the only coach in the history of Auburn University to beat Alabama 6 consecutive times. And he's coached 7 teams that finished in the top 25, including the 2004 Auburn Tigers, who were undefeated but excluded from the BCS National Championship game, which planted an early seed for the college football playoff. He's won everywhere he's been, over 19 seasons at 4 different schools, including this year at Cincinnati, which won a share of the American Athletic Conference title yesterday with a big victory over Houston. Let's welcome Coach Tommy Tuberville. Joining us via Skype today is our third coach, who's won 210 games during a remarkable career, that took him from high schools and small colleges all the way to Alabama and Texas A&M. His 3-season run at TCU, in which he won 25 games, turned around that program and got it started on the path that could very well lead to a college football playoff berth in the next few minutes. His latest triumph was helping Texas State make a successful transition from the FCS to the FBS level, and the Bobcats have continued to make progress each year, finishing 7-5 this season. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Coach Dennis Francione. Coach, how are you?
I'm doing good.
All right, guys, well, let's get to it. We saw the coaches poll. What were your biggest takeaways, first of all, from yesterday? We saw a championship Saturday. Alabama won the SEC. Ohio State, obviously, was very impressive. Coach Cutcliffe, do you think that the results yesterday made it easier or more difficult for the committee?
Well, I think it probably made it a good bit more difficult because we had so many runaway games. I think surprisingly, starting Friday night with Oregon, Arizona, I think we learned where one team had beaten a team earlier in the season, and then Oregon clearly dominated the game. There were some dominant football games, Big Ten, SEC. So I think it threw a lot of thought process in a different direction yesterday. So I think we may see some movement in the top four.
Coach, Tuberville, Ohio State moves into the top four. You played them earlier this year. What were your impressions of them when you saw them up close and then yesterday in the Big Ten title game?
Very athletic. They've got a lot of depth on their team. They've got a lot of offensive, defensive linemen. They do have speed. Sometimes that's criticized with teams north of the Mason-Dixon line, but they have a lot of good athletes, and we had a tough time with them. Obviously, now they've had controversy. They've had 2 quarterbacks that's been knocked out, and I just think it shows the depth of their program of how they played yesterday against a very good Wisconsin team. But you can also look at this poll, and I think you see the difference in fan reaction sometimes. I would imagine the fans probably would not have moved Ohio State up because of their loss of the quarterbacks. But as coaches look at it, we look at the whole spectrum of the situation. We look at all their athletes, how they played all year long, and the schemes that they play. I always look at defense and can you run the football, and they can do both of those.
Coach Francione, Ohio State down to their third-string quarterback. Did the way they played yesterday impact the way you viewed their team going into the final weekend?
It did. It impacted my vote. I moved them up to number 4 just because when you go to your third quarterback, any team, and win in the manner that they did, that's a pretty huge statement right there. And after their early loss to Virginia Tech and then changing quarterbacks, going with the young one, and then watching their season transpire, and then still to be able to go to your number 3 quarterback and win like they did yesterday, it impacted the way I felt about them.
Let's talk about Alabama for a second. Number 1, typically in the past, voters, if there was an undefeated team, went with the undefeated team on top. Alabama has obviously changed that a little bit. Did you agree, Coach Cutcliffe, with Alabama being number 1?
Well, I think Alabama's a great football team because they have balance. They've got an outstanding kicking game, great punter, certainly outstanding defense. They're playing great offense and very explosive. But I personally voted Florida State number 1, and it's not because they were an Atlantic Coast Conference team, which we play in, but it's difficult to go undefeated in a season. They've done it now 2 years. 13 games each of the last 2 years in the regular season and a 14th game a year ago in the national championship game. And I just think that as a coach, I think you realize how difficult that task is. And regardless of scores, regardless of comebacks, the stress their program's been under, the stress their players are under week after week, and they're a target for all of us. That's pretty amazing what they've accomplished. So I had Florida State 1, Alabama 2.
We'll talk more about Florida State in a little bit. Coach Tuberville, what were your impressions of Alabama yesterday in Atlanta?
Well, their body of work over the last few years is just unbelievable. But they got great athletes. They got a lot of depth. And I was a little bit surprised how their quarterback played this year. I watched him some in their spring game last spring, and I was thinking, they might struggle a bit at quarterback. But I think the the addition to Lane Kiffin and what he's done with that quarterback, along with all the great players they have around him, I think it's made them a viable candidate to win the national championship again. But they do run the football, and they've got tremendous depth on the defensive line, and they have a lot of speed. So I'm like Coach Cutcliffe, though. I voted Florida State #1. I just believe that all the controversy that they've had, and I was at Miami for years back in the good days when we were winning almost every game. Everybody thought it was easy, but the more you win, the harder it gets. And because the target's on your back every week, everybody gives their best game against the #1 team in the country. And so what Florida State's done, they've earned that respect. Now they've got the right to get in the Final Four, I believe. Now they're going to have to prove it.
Coach Franchione, who's your #1 team, if you don't mind revealing it? And what were your impressions of Alabama yesterday?
I voted for Florida State. I agree with Tommy and David. I've coached a team that has had a long consecutive winning streak, and you get everybody's best shot, and it's very difficult to do. And as far as I'm concerned, they started the year #1, and until they lost a football game, they needed to stay at #1. Alabama certainly presents plenty of arguments for their position as the #1 team in the nation. They are a very complete football team in every way, shape, or form, offensively, defensively, and in the kicking game. And it's going to be a great matchup in the playoff.
Most of the focus of the playoff is with these top 6 teams. They all had a chance going into yesterday. Do we have a slide showing the top 6 from the final coaches poll today? Okay, Alabama, Florida State, and Oregon. I think we all know that those 3 teams are going to be in the playoff, barring a massive surprise. So it really came down to Ohio State, Baylor, and TCU. I'll throw this open to anybody. What would be the case for Ohio State above the 2 Big 12 teams?
Tommy played them, so I'm going to defer this end to him.
Yeah, I'd think linemen, defensive linemen, to be particular, because you win championships with defense, and they've got so many linemen and with so much speed, linebackers that can run. Their defensive backs are solid. Now, that's not saying that TCU is not and Baylor's not. TCU and Baylor play in a different conference. They play in an offensive league. I would imagine Art Browse would tell you this straight up. They try to win with offense. They try to outscore you. Now, can you do that in a playoff scenario? Can you outscore people with great defenses? Gary Patterson's a little bit more defensive minded because he's a defensive coach. He brought in a new offensive coordinator this year, totally different offense. They spread it around. They've got Boykin at quarterback, who's an excellent football player, and he's made that football team. Now, if TCU makes it, can they play both sides of the ball and compete with these other 3 teams that's going to probably make the Final Four? That's yet to be seen, but I would think, just myself watching all 3 of these teams, the best candidate would probably be Ohio State to compete with the other 3 teams.
I mean, it's going to be very close. I think the committee is going to have a very tough time separating those 3. Is there any factor that you can identify that you think would separate one of those teams out of that group?
Well, I think if you look at the body of work Ohio State's had since week 2, it's hard to argue. They had I thought, a tougher schedule. They played in the championship game in a difficult environment under a lot of pressure with a third-team quarterback. That's the reason that I put them 4th. I also think Ohio State, and you don't know this, I mean, we're all susceptible to being wrong. I think if Ohio State played Texas Christian or Baylor, I would think Ohio State would win. And that's kind of how I took the common sense approach to making my decision as Ohio State being the 4th team that I thought deserved that opportunity.
Let's get into this Baylor-TCU debate for a little bit. Coach Franchione, you're in the state of Texas. I'm sure it's been quite lively down where you are. The committee, up until this point, has seemed to favor TCU, has seemed to suggest that they think TCU is a better team, even though Baylor beat them head-to-head. I'm curious about all of your thoughts on how much head-to-head matters, and in a situation like that where they've got the same record, they played 10 common opponents, what you expect to see from the committee coming up here shortly.
I'm still a believer that head-to-head has to matter. They both finished with one loss. They played each other on the field, and the decision was that Baylor was a little bit better football team. All that matters in our game is who's the best at kickoff on that day. And we determine a winner and we determine a loser, and Baylor was the winner. And so in my vote, I voted Baylor ahead of TCU. And certainly if anybody would have a little compassion for TCU in his heart, it would be me. But I still think the on the field has to make a difference. Had Baylor have slipped and lost to another football team, then that would have been out the window. But as they finish with identical records, I have to give the edge to Baylor. Both have great football teams, and TCU is about as complete a team, offensively, defensively, and kicking game as you could find out there.
Well, that's the thing. I'm not a football coach, but when I watch TCU, I see a team that's really strong in all three phases of the game. I know they lost head-to-head to Baylor. Is it possible to believe that even though the way that fourth quarter went, Baylor beat them, that TCU is a better football team? Is it possible to believe that?
Yeah, I don't think any of us know that. And so I agree with Dennis. You have to refer back to, we've been saying forever now, let's win it on the field. All you can do is go back to that game. We can argue complete. We can argue that Baylor doesn't play defense. I'll tell you from my book and watching and studying both of them through the years, they are extremely well coached. That's one thing I would say about both of those teams. I think Art and Gary do an incredible job in all three phases and all aspects. Their teams are extremely competitive. Both of them have playmakers. They could play 10 times and it may go 5-5, but we don't know that. They played one time, and I voted the same way.
Coach, any thoughts on that debate and what might separate those two teams?
We have a committee. Is a committee the right way to do it? I don't know. Is it the way we picked the committee the right way to do it? I think that's up for grabs. The coaches poll is not used for some reason. And I still am a true believer that coaches know a little bit about, who the best teams in the country are. And I would think today the committee's kind of glancing over their shoulder of what did the coaches think? But if you look back at TCU's been in the Big 12, 3 years, and they've struggled. And unfortunately, they're not supposed to count the last few years. But I think the committee is going to look at the body of work of TCU the last couple of years of struggling to be 500, and then all of a sudden having a very good year. Are they going to hold that against them? They should not at all. I can remember when I was at Auburn in 2003, we went 7-5. We were ranked 17th in the nation coming out the next year. We go undefeated, and I'm on the outside looking into two teams that went undefeated all the way through the season. Only time it ever happened in the poll, USC, Oklahoma. And I think a lot of it was because of how we played the year before. We didn't get ranked 1 or 2. So I think hopefully that doesn't happen. But, Baylor and TCU have good programs. I just hope that everybody understands the significance of the pick today. And again, it's out of everybody's hands except those committee members that are going to look at different situations.
Can you imagine, though, if you're Gary Patterson, you were ranked number 3 last week by the selection committee, number 3 in the playoff. You go out and you take care of business yesterday against Iowa State, a team that's been struggling, but a team that won. They did win the game quite handily. They could have basically named their score, and they could fall out of this thing. I mean, as a coach, that's got to be a nightmare.
It would be hard to face your team, and I will give them that. But again, the number 3 ranking prior to that, again, was just someone else's opinion.
Right.
And you're susceptible to that. All of us are. When we look at a poll, we don't see a Cincinnati or a Duke up there. We both have an argument. You've won 7 games in a row. We've got a really fine football team. But, it comes back to me, I think, whoever's left out, be very proud of your body of work. Let's not let somebody else's opinion dictate whether you're successful or not. And I hope those young men can grasp that. That's one of the problems I have with what we're doing today. This is pretty difficult on the student athletes, where the previous system may have been a little easier on our student athletes. So I think we got to look. We're going to learn. this is all new.
Let's get back into Florida State a little bit. Coach Francione, your comment about the fact that you've been through a long winning streak and you get everybody's best shot. Still, was Florida State the most impressive team just in terms of on-the-field play week after week?
You have to consider a lot of things. They're going to get everybody's best shot. It gets harder and harder to keep winning. The pressure continues to mount on your players as you continue to win. They carry a little bit of a burden in that regard. And believe me, for 18 to 22-year-olds, they know about that. And it does imply some pressure. And they continue to find ways to win football games, not always glamorous wise, but they won. And when you win that many games in a row, to me, you have to be dethroned with a loss before it can be taken away from you. And they certainly have got close a lot of times to falling into that category, but it never happened, and they need to be commended for that.
I'm told we're still a few minutes away from the actual announcement. Florida State was ranked number 4 last week. And again, they sort of got by the skin of their teeth last night against Georgia Tech. Is there any chance the committee just drops them out at this point?
I hope not. I'm going to tell you something as a coach that I have believed in for nearly 40 years now, and I was trained this way. To be a great football team, you should be a great fourth quarter football team. You're going to play tough football games, tough in-conference games. Our big conferences, that's enough pressure in itself, whether you're the SEC West or the ACC Atlantic or Coastal, that doesn't matter. But when you win they're the best fourth quarter football team in the country. Nobody would argue that. So I would hope a committee that knows something about football understands the value of the fourth quarter. I want a football team plays great in the fourth quarter. We'll win a lot of football games if we do that.
I'm being told that Alabama is number 1. The College Football Playoff Selection Committee has spoken. Not a huge surprise. They'll go to the Sugar Bowl. I saw them last night in the Georgia Dome, and the way they've just progressed throughout the season has been so impressive. I mean, Nick Saban's done a lot of great coaching jobs over the years, but this may be the best in terms of how far he's had to take a team. Just from the start of the season until now. When they lost to Ole Miss, it didn't seem like they were going to have enough offense, but they seem to have adjusted. They've gotten Blake Sims more comfortable. I think they're going to be a very tough out. We'll wait to see who they play. Coach Tuberville, you mentioned your experience at Miami. Do you think that's analogous to what Florida State is going through right now when they're the biggest bully on the block?
Yeah, I think there's a comparison. But, you just got to look at all the teams and look at the players on the team. Alabama was picked number 1 for this reason. They got the best players.
Mm-hmm.
They recruit the best every year. They got the best players on their team. Obviously, you got to coach them, but Florida State's right behind them. And as you just said, when you get good football players on your team, football players win the games. Coaches don't. And so what they have to do, and they've done a good job, Florida State, Alabama over the years, last few years have done a good job of making sure those guys go in the right direction and play well together, because this is a true team sport. This is not like another sport. You've got to have 50 to 60 guys that play well every week. And if they don't, on that level that we're talking about right now, the top 4, you're not going to make the top 4. So it'll be interesting.
Oregon is number 2. Florida State is number 3. So there we go. Those 3 teams are in. Florida State, on the strength of winning the ACC title, is in at number 3. So they'll play Oregon in the Rose Bowl. Any initial thoughts on that matchup?
Be a great matchup. I think right now Oregon may be that team that's playing as well, if not better, than anyone. You're talking about a team that showed their defensive muscle in their conference championship game. I do think this. I think when you get in these games and you've got Florida State and an Eastern time zone team traveling to the West Coast, we had that conversation
Coach, I don't mean to
earlier.
interrupt you. Ohio State is the number 4
There
team
we go.
from the College Football Playoff Selection Committee. So there we go. The Big 12 is out of the playoff. And we've been talking for weeks about whether the Big 12 would sort itself out, and Ohio State takes that final spot. You guys called it, and the coaches poll called it. The coaches poll had Ohio State at number 4. I'm sure this is a really difficult thing for the folks at TCU and the folks at Baylor. But do you think they got it right?
Well, you know, as I said back in 2004, I went through the same thing. The week before the last ball game, when it was 1-2, I was tied with Oklahoma, and we go to play Alabama and beat Alabama on the road by 2 touchdowns, and we fall to 3. The toughest thing I've ever had to do is go into that room and tell those guys, hey, you did everything you could do. It just didn't work out, you know. And Art Briles is going to have to do that today. Gary Patterson's going to have to do that today. And it's tough. It's tough. But again, at least we got 2 more teams in it. And most of us as coaches are for this +1 for this one reason, to give an opportunity for at least 4 teams to play in this championship.
Coach Franchione, what do you think made the difference for Ohio State?
I think last night's game for the entire nation and everybody to see, the fact that they go to their 3rd quarterback and he does so well, but then the complete victory, the complete win again in a conference championship team against a team ranked in the top 10 or 15 like Wisconsin, who's had a great year themselves, and to beat them like they did was a statement that is just impossible to overlook.
You know, one of the things I've always wondered about this system and having 12 committee members in a room was whether brand bias would enter the equation. You know, the reality is TCU is a great program, Baylor's a great program, but, you know, the name Ohio State on the front of the jersey has meaning to people, whether they want to admit it or not. So does Alabama, so does Florida State, because all those programs have won national championships. Do you think that it's possible that just in the back of, you know, the minds of guys like Barry Alvarez and Tom Osborne, you know, that is maybe just a tiebreaker? I mean, is that hard to get away from?
Well, I think it's a part of it. Anytime you factor in the human condition, we hear names that reap tradition and a strong history in college football. Oregon is a little bit of a, if you will, a newcomer to that, but not a newcomer. I mean, we're used to Oregon every year looking like they're going to be a national championship team. What I would say, and whether this was, and I could mean this, and I do mean this, our coaches poll reflected a top 6 that clearly separated themselves. You know, this trophy is the symbol of college football supremacy. In the end, regardless of who would have gotten into it, I would have been proud as a college football coach for this trophy to be delivered to whomever wins that 4-team playoff. And I think any of the 6 were worthy, but unfortunately it does go back to someone's opinion. And I feel for those student athletes at TCU and Baylor, but we're all very proud as coaches as to what those programs have accomplished.
I'm told that Baylor actually finished number 5 and TCU was number 6. Let's talk about the Big 12. 2 of you gentlemen have coached in that league. And, you know, it seems to me that they now have a little bit of an issue on their hands because they were in such a good position for so long, but they're the only major conference that doesn't have a conference championship game. Coach Tuberville, you think that hurt them?
Yeah, I coached at Texas Tech up until last year for 3 years, and there was major chaos in that league. Had 4 teams that jumped and left: Nebraska, Colorado, Missouri, and Texas A&M. And since then, they've been trying to find a semblance of security. But they thought, the commissioner and the athletic directors thought that 10 was enough. Now, that was before the +1 was added. And so I'm sure they'll go back and evaluate that. That won't be a main decision on what they do if they add teams or take teams away or split the conference. I don't think that's going to be a major decision because you're talking about institutions with long lives of tradition. And so, you know, again, it's unfortunate, but we knew it was going to come to this. We knew 5 and 6 was going to get left out, and today I'm with Coach Cutcliffe. Now I think the tradition might have won out today with Ohio State winning a national championship, what, in 2003 maybe?
Right.
Yeah, and they've been there a lot more often, and sometimes the committee members look at that.
They also have a coach by the name of Urban Meyer who draws some eyeballs for television. And I mean, let's face it, Urban Meyer versus Nick Saban in the Sugar Bowl is a storyline that everybody wants to see. And I think it should be a terrific game. Coach Franchione, do you think the Big 12 is going to have to reevaluate what they do because of this result?
Well, I'm sure they're going to look at it, but a couple points there. Number one, they're the only league that play each other. So at the end of the day, the schedules are comparable. They don't play a championship game, but they played every team in that league, and so when you start naming a true champion, they may have a little edge in that regard, because Alabama's schedule is different than Auburn's. Ohio State's schedule is different than Wisconsin's. I'm sure the committee put all that information into their decision, who had the toughest schedules and everything. I'm sure the Big 12 will evaluate and look at what they could have done differently here. We go back to TCU being number 3 and then dropping back all the way to number 6, but that number 3 ranking was not based on the entire season. Unfortunately for TCU, they played a 2-10 team in Iowa State the last weekend, and Baylor played a team that, if they win the game, is the Big 12 conference champion. So a lot goes into this. You would hope that the committee would put the resumes up on a board without the names of the coaches or the schools, and so that we select the best football teams for this season to be represented in this playoff.
You bring me to an interesting point about the weekly rankings. Do you think that was a productive move by the committee to release their poll? I mean, you guys have your poll, but theirs, given the stakes of what was going on in the playoff every week, and now that we see how much it changed in the final week and what the consequences of that are going to be for a school like TCU, is that something they should reevaluate, or did you like having that every Tuesday night?
I think they have to be held to do that. I mean, you can't suddenly at the last minute pick a top 4, and I think there's some accountability that puts it in their lap a little. And certainly I think one of the intentions of all of this is to strengthen a great college football regular season even more. We've probably had the most watched, talked about, spectacular regular season in the history of college football. So that's not going to go away. They're going to continue to do that.
Coach Tuberville, do you like the rankings?
Yeah. I think that what you saw today, the coaches poll, kind of matching what the committee picked. I would hope in the future that maybe the coaches poll is added into that committee.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm sure it was today. I'm sure that they looked at that coaches poll and kind of said, hey, let's see what the coaches think. And the coaches need to be involved. They need to be involved. And I understand having a committee, but I think there needs to be an involvement with coaches that vote and get their opinion, and the opinion should be expressed.
Let's talk about the actual way these games are going to be played. It used to be you had your BCS championship matchup, you had a month to prepare, and then that was it. You had one game to prepare for. Now potentially you've got 2. You've got to play one great team in the semifinals. If you're a coach or a player, you win that Sugar Bowl, you win that Rose Bowl, you probably feel, like $1 million to win that game against a great team. And then all of a sudden you've got to turn around and get ready for another great team in the championship game. That's going to be a little bit different, just from a mentality standpoint for everybody. How do you think these teams are going to adapt to that? These coaches are going to adapt to it. And what's the biggest challenge you think for getting ready for 2 great teams in 12 days?
Well, I've coached in 5 national championship games when I was at Miami. And the toughest thing is to have 40 to 45 days off. I mean, that's what's tough. Now that we've got the championship games, that's narrowed it a little bit, but you still have a long time to play. And these are kids we're dealing with. They're not 30, 40-year-old NFL players. And so you're going to get some bad habits in there somewhere. So I think you're probably going to see some better games, especially the second game. I think you might get a surprise in the first two. You won't get a surprise in the second one. They'll be ready to play. Turnovers usually decide a championship game in defense. So I think you're going to see better football.
I think we got to hope there's no big-time injury in either one of the semifinal games that would affect the outcome of a championship game. But I think these coaches at all four institutions are going to focus on this semifinal game during this long stretch. I think it's a mistake if they do anything else. They'll worry about each other for those 8 or 9 days after we see who's the winner.
Coach Franchione, do you agree with that? No prep for the final. Pour everything into the semis?
Well, I think somebody on the staff is going to be looking at the other teams, but the coaching staff, the 9 guys and the coach are going to put their attention and focus on the team that they're getting ready to play, certainly. And one thing about our sport that I believe, and having been in playoffs myself many times, we don't lend ourselves to a tournament format very well. And David mentioned this. The tough thing about a tournament format is the injury factor. And you can be a different team in this sport very quickly with a few injuries in certain positions that can change everything dramatically. And I've been through that. And then the other thing, you talk about the winners getting ready for the second time. The most difficult thing I found is to be the loser. And you're done. It's over. You didn't make it. You finish your season with an empty feeling, and you shouldn't. You've had a great year. But the players get to a point that only one goal matters, and that's to get to the national championship game. And so the 2 teams that come up short in this semifinal game are going to feel some pain.
Let's talk about each of these games a little bit. Alabama's obviously playing their best football late in the year, and Nick Saban's as good as anybody at getting a team ready in that month off. But Urban Meyer's also experienced at doing that. Did it twice at Florida. Do you think Nick is a little bit concerned about playing the hot team at the end of the season in Ohio State?
I think Tommy mentioned, I don't think it's a coach thing. I think if you'll start with the line of scrimmage in that game particularly. I think Alabama's got an outstanding line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball. Ohio State does as well. How the rest of the team performs, turnovers, the kicking game, I think it's just going to be a clash of 2 really deep, good football teams. And so I think it'll be one of those that we're not going to see the outcome of it until well into the fourth quarter, personally.
Yeah, I think Alabama's probably satisfied with their draw.
Okay.
I think that, they've had some experience playing against the spread teams such as Missouri yesterday and, of course, Auburn. Now, Auburn had 700 yards offense, but they had a quarterback that could run. Ohio State's quarterback's not a real running threat when you talk about Alabama's defense, not like Nick Marshall was at Auburn. So Alabama's going to force them to throw the ball. And there's no doubt that there's going to be an advantage for Alabama when it comes to that.
With the third string quarterback, though, having a month, practice to get ready, is that going to be a big help to him? Because he doesn't have a whole lot of experience.
Well, yeah, that's true, but he's still a third-team quarterback for a reason. There's something he doesn't do as well as the other 2, and that's not going to change over this period of time. Not that he's not a good player. He obviously played extremely well and is capable of playing extremely well. But when you're playing against someone's third-team quarterback, he is third team for a reason.
Coach Franchione, what do you think about this matchup?
Well, it's a great matchup. 2 great programs and 2 great coaches that'll know how to get their teams ready to play in this game. Both Tommy and David said a lot of great things right there. And, the third-team quarterback, he will still be third team when they play the game because he may have practices, but he's had a lot of practices. He has no games to gain experience in. And in the long run, as coaches, we all know that practice is one thing, but making the right decisions in the games really separate who the best players are and who starts and who doesn't. And that's why he probably has been the third team quarterback. They're blessed though that they're all good football players, but he will go in with somewhat of as an inexperienced quarterback, and it'll be an element in the game that will have to be dealt with. Coach Meyer did a great job of dealing with it in a short amount of time in the week leading up to the championship game. So you got to feel like he will maximize the preparation for this young man in getting ready to play Alabama. But this is a big stage. It'll be in New Orleans. That probably favors the Crimson Tide just a little bit right there, playing right there. But it's going to be a heck of a football game.
So Florida State, they have to go back to Pasadena. They have good memories there from last January. But they've got to play Oregon. And this Oregon team, they lost that game early at home to Arizona, but they got their offensive line fixed. That seemed to make all the difference. In the chances you've gotten to watch them, how impressed are you with what they've been able to do? And obviously Mariota's, you've got the two best quarterbacks in the country right there.
I thought watching through yesterday, I thought Oregon probably was the best team playing at this time. Now, not all year long. And so now we're talking about a 2-game shot. And I think Florida State's going to have some problems. The quarterback is very, very good. He can make big plays. And I know Jameis Winston, he's won the Heisman Trophy, and he's done all those things. But there's something special about that quarterback from Oregon this year. He can make big plays out of bad plays. He's got real good players around him. And, Oregon's playing defense. Their defense is better. And so, if I was choosing the winners of those 2 games, I'd be picking Oregon, especially out on the West Coast.
Yeah, it's probably going to be a matchup of 2 Heisman Trophy winners. Mariota seems to be the guy that most people are going to vote for. We'll find out next weekend. But, Coach Cutcliffe, I mean, the defense of Oregon and the way they've improved this year, it seems like that can maybe be the difference in their team and having a real shot at this.
I think the biggest difference in Florida State's team from this year to last year is their defense.
Yeah.
And I think Oregon's offense is highly capable.
Coach Franchione, what do you think? Who would you take in this game?
The thing that impressed me watching Oregon the other night was their defense. And it's been mentioned in this group that defense wins championships. And they were very well coached, very well prepared for Arizona, and really did not give up very many yards or much breathing room to Arizona's offense, which has been pretty dynamic all year. Playing on the West Coast has got to be a little bit of an aid to them that Florida State will deal with well, I'm sure. Florida State's been in a lot of close games and has found ways to win. That's something that will be something they can draw from as they go into this game. That'll probably be a very close game. But we've got 2 great quarterbacks. Marcus Mariota's had a great year. To me, he is the Heisman Trophy winning quarterback, and I would give a little edge to Oregon going into this one.
Now that we've been through this system for a year, we've seen the results. I do want to get into a little bit about schools outside the Power 5. The rankings each week that the committee put out. Marshall was undefeated for a long time, couldn't get in. They finally did. Boise State got in at the end of the year. Is this system inclusive enough? I mean, is it giving a fair shot to everybody? I mean, Coach Tuberville, you're one of the best programs outside that so-called Power 5. I'm curious about your thoughts on having gone through this now for a year, whether it's enough access.
Yeah, I think it gives an opportunity, for somebody to break into the situation of making it to the Final Four or even making it into the BCS one of the games. Mm-hmm. There has to be an opportunity. If you look at several teams, Boise's been up there for years, and it looks like they're going to probably get into one of the games mm-hmm. because of how they played and their body of work for 12 games. But as long as you have an opportunity, like I told our team, hey, you pretty much got to win them all to have an opportunity to get in there. And, our schedules are not as tough. We don't play in the venues that some of these other teams and conferences do. So I think it's a fair shot.
Coach Franchione, what do you think?
I agree. At least there is automatic access now. And I think it'll be up to Boise State now to represent our conference as well. To go in there and to say, hey, we do deserve this access spot. And they've played very well in bowl games prior to, so there's probably no doubt that they're going to do that very well. I think for years, the access was so limited and so difficult that there was almost an unfair feeling sometimes, and this at least puts it to where we know what we have to do. We know how to go about it, and we know what the road to get there is, and I think we all appreciate that.
Do you think this thing is eventually going to end up at 8? Do you think that after this year, especially with those Big 12 teams getting left out, there's going to be a push to expand this thing?
Well, this all started back, again, in my situation in 2004 when an SEC team got left out undefeated. Urban Meyer at Utah was undefeated that same year. So there's 4 undefeated teams that didn't have an opportunity to win the championship. So after that started, it's taken us 10 years to get to this point. This is the 10-year anniversary of that time, and the whole deal is the presidents. They don't want to interfere academics with playing during final exams, all those things. I think you're going to have a hard time convincing them that 8 is the best. I think we'll probably be with 4 for a few years. It might go the other way. We might go back to 2. Who knows? But a lot of things factor in, but the presidents have the final say.
You know, I just wonder, because one of the 5 power conferences every year, at least one, is going to be left out of this thing. I just wonder if the commissioners are going to, be willing to take the heat for that. And frankly, Bob Bowlesby, I think, will take some heat in the Big 12 because from his constituents, because they refused to name Baylor as the sole champion. There were co-champions, even though Baylor won head-to-head, and who knows whether that made a difference or not. But I just wonder if there's going to be a push to try to make it 8.
I think that's the best argument that it may happen is the commissioners of the Power 5 and others are not going to feel very comfortable in their circumstance. So they will lobby their presidents. Whether they can pull that off or not, I don't know. But I have seen numerous comments come out of the commissioner's offices about 8 already, and we hadn't even played 4 yet. So I find that kind of interesting.
Coach Franchione, any predictions? Do you think it's going to 8?
I hope not. It doesn't matter. Today we're upset with the number 5 team and number 6 team is upset. If we go to 8, it'll be 9 and 10. If we go to 16, it'll be 17 and 18. There's never going to be a perfect formula. I don't think our game lends itself to the tournament format as well as the NFL does. Tommy mentioned academics, semester breaks. We're playing 12 games right now. The regular season has so much meaning across the board. And the discussion of who is 4 and who is 5, unfortunately, or fortunately, I guess I should say, is great for college football. And the argument won't go away, whether it's 4, 8, 12, 16, or whatever it may be. Just as in the NCAA basketball tournament, the ones just out of number 65 are still believing that it should be more, they should be in. And in the long run, the excitement of that is probably still good for college football.
Would any of you be interested in being in that ex-coach role on the committee when you're through?
I don't think I would care for it myself. That's a big job.
Right, a lot of time.
Time-consuming job. As long as the 3 of us have coached, I think we need to be in our living rooms watching this show and others at that point in time.
So I think we're all sort of in agreement here that Alabama probably has the edge against Ohio State, and Oregon is probably deserves to be favored. If it ends up Alabama and Oregon in that championship game in Dallas, what kind of matchup do you think that's going to be? And who do you expect at the end of the day to be holding this trophy as the symbol of supremacy in college football?
Tough call. I do think that those kinds of environments, recent history tells us, favors a Southeastern Conference team. I had 26 years in the league, Tommy a long time in the league. Those types of environments happen almost every week with the media, the type crowds. I think the Alabama players will be very comfortable with this format, and I think that gives them some advantage. Although I have no idea who's the better team, But that's kind of why I think Southeastern Conference has played so well in championship games. I'm not sure what you guys think.
Yeah,
Dennis has been there as well.
of course, defense is going to be the deciding factor. But I go back to the Auburn game. Oregon runs the same offense as Auburn, and they had almost 700 yards and 40-something points. So they found something there because they can run and throw. I think it'll be a great matchup for Alabama because when you spread a defense out that has the muscle that they have, that gives you an advantage on offense because you take them out of a confined area and make them tackle in space. And they didn't do that well against Auburn. Now, they scored a lot of points, and this could be a scored match like the Iron Bowl was a couple of weeks ago.
Coach Franchione?
I lean towards Alabama. I think everything the guys said is accurate, and Alabama is certainly a really good defensive football team. I think what separates them a little bit right now is they're pretty good on offense. Lane Kiffin's made a difference. Coach Saban wasn't much for the no huddle in the offseason, and adaptation by a coach is great. I see watching the game last night, they're in no huddle to start the game. So he does what he needs to do to put his team in the best position to win. And the addition of the offense, they had a hard time slowing down Auburn, as Tommy mentioned, but they scored lots of points. And the defense they'll go against in Oregon appears to be a little tougher maybe than it would be in Auburn's case this year. But you got to put all those components together. And I agree with David. This is just another week in the SEC, just another week in the way that league goes, and it prepares those teams for these kind of matchups well.
Do we give Ohio State any chance to win 2 games?
Absolutely. I tell you what I think Urban's done, and it's been noticeable on the recruiting trail. I think this may be the most athletic Ohio State team we've seen in recent time. He's done a good job of recruiting speed, going a lot of places to do that, and they still have those big, massive linemen. But I think this is a faster Ohio State team than people realize. And Tommy, you can speak to that.
I think they'll struggle. I really do because of the quarterback. I think that he's got too much time to think about this game. He's going to do too many interviews. He's never done that before.
Right.
This is a different animal he's getting ready to get involved in. It's going to be very stressful to him. A lot of people pointing fingers at him. You got to get the job done. If somebody else on the Ohio State's football team can step up and take the bull by the horn and run with it, they'll have a chance. But if he's got to do it himself, he won't get it done.
And then Florida State, they almost are going to get lost in this a little bit, but we know about the long winning streak. I always hesitate to pick against Jameis Winston because it just doesn't seem like he does anything in the fourth quarter, but make the plays he needs to make. And Oregon, I mean, they've played great teams this year, but I don't know if they've played somebody who's as offensively talented as Florida State.
Florida State is the best fourth quarter football team in the country right now. I don't really know that that's an argument. And these games may well all come down to fourth quarter results. So don't count them out. There's a reason they're undefeated.
And they were 21 points down last year going into almost the second half of the national championship game to Auburn and won the game.
Jimbo Fisher called that fake punt at just the right time, saw the game getting away from him. And, that kind of championship coaching experience, Mark Helfrich is sort of an unknown quantity in terms of winning championships. He's not been a head coach very long. It'll be sort of a new challenge for him to prepare.
I don't think it's about coaching the game, and I've seen Jimmy Johnson and Dennis Erickson do this and coaching over a long period of time for national championships. You win the game between those periods of time. How do you handle your team?
Right.
How do you practice? How do you prepare? You're going to beat each other up. You're going to go in it and try to have fresh legs. There's no perfect situation. You got to know your football team, and that's where you win the national championship, coaching the game. It's not during the game. It's between the 4 weeks of preparation.
All right, so we're going to close it up here. Each of you, I want who's going to hold this trophy at the end. We'll make it short and sweet, Coach Franchione.
I lean towards Alabama. I think they are a very complete football team. I think the way things have set up here, it sets up well for them. And I think playing in New Orleans will help them a little bit. But there are two teams, Florida State and Alabama, that are prepared for this very well. Florida State was there last year. Their players have all gone through it. And the Alabama players, to a degree, have all gone through what's going to happen in the next month. They have not gone through an additional game, but they understand the format and the challenges ahead as good as anybody. Now, Urban Meyer understands them well, and he will do a good job preparing these players. But my lean is towards Alabama at this time.
Coach Tuberville?
You know, any four of them can win it. It's one of those things you can just pull it out of the hat. They're all good, man. They're all well coached. I'm going to be kind of the devil's advocate. I'm going to say Oregon's going to win it. I think they're going to win it on the East Coast, and I think that they've got the speed to do it. Can they play enough defense? That's going to be the key. And it's a one-game shot. And I'll just say that quarterback, the way he's playing, is going to win it.
I like all four of them. I've seen all four of them on tape, but I am not going to pick against my alma mater. I'm going to take Alabama to win this whole thing.
Well, one of those four teams is going to be holding this trophy that I know that you guys feel very strongly about. Glad that it's going to be part of the process and presented to the national champion in this new era, the symbol of supremacy in college football. And we certainly want to thank Amway for sponsoring the poll all year long. Thank all of you for voting and for participating today. Hopefully everybody enjoyed it. And thanks very much. And hopefully we'll see you next year.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Great job. Great job for Dan here.